When did your dad, the judge, get elected?
Yeah, he was elected like in, I can't be sure the exact date, but it was like 1932, and he retired, sometime in the 40s. I think it was 18 or 20 years. He started out as a prosecuting attorney, but he was like the orator of the party. I used to go around with him when I was a kid. Well, half of the Irish came to Massachusetts. They were Boston Irish.
Yeah.
The land of the what and the bean were the land of the bean and the cod, where the Cabots speak to the lodges and the lodges speak only to God. They talk about these things that went on in Boston now, the thing about the church and all that in the Boston Globe.
Yeah.
Whose voice do you think the Boston newspaper was in the time when the old man and his whoever Uncle Jim would get to Boston and move to Worcester? That was, remember the problems of the Irish in Boston?
Tell me a few of those now.
The downtrodden there. And this Boston persecution may have some roots in the distant past. And now even I hear stuff on the TV that makes me think that a lot of people have forgotten about history that went back to that time, because a lot of this bias and persecution that's being capitalized in the media and things like that may have had its roots way back then. Going back to the first immigration of the Irish peasants to a culture that was basically what Anglo-Saxon immigrant economic status to this country, and the classes were very
defined.
Problems,
Yeah.
They had we had migrations in this neighborhood in the 1960s. The whole neighborhood changed. Boston probably changed.
Oh, in the same way.
Over the other century.
Yeah. It's interesting. I had no idea that the house on Long was that old.
That house and one other they always said was somewhere over near where the town hall is, were farmhouses. The country between the Fox River and Chicago now used to be all farmland. When I was a kid, we went through real farm country from here to Aurora and Elgin and those places. We have relatives out there.
Wow, that's amazing. The judge's dad, what was his name?
Jeremiah.
And your grandma's name was what?
Her name was Mary Ellen McFadden. Remember Bernard McFadden, the muscle man?
No.
Well, he was Scots. He was Scot, and he was a physical education professional. He used to lift weights and train people to be.
This was her brother?
No, that's the McFadden name was.
Oh, okay.
Scott. I knew he was a Scot, and McFadden is a Scots name.
Right,
so
right.
That makes four. My mother's name is German, and her name is German. Her mother was Dutch, Van Loon. Her father was Lang, which was German, and the Langs went to Canada and things like that.
Well, they had the tannery up there.
Yeah.
How do you think your grandfather met your grandmother?
Oh, he was the youngest in the family. They owned the tannery, and he was the youngest one. He was sent here to buy hides. He was their hide agent in the stockyards. He was the youngest of the Lang family that came from Germany to Canada via either his father or his grandfather started the tannery there.
Right.
And, it did very well. I think they made all the leather stuff for the British cavalry in World War.
How do you think your grandmother and grandfather met in Worcester?
That I don't know.
But you know when they came from Worcester to...
Yeah, like 80, my dad was, let me think, he was born in Worcester and he got here in 82 and he got here in 82 with Jimmy Quinn and his mother and father. He was the oldest of the boys.
How was Jimmy Quinn related to the family? He was just a
I
friend,
don't know,
right?
they must have come over in the same boat, or I don't know what it was, but they lived in a flat on one of the streets downtown in Holy Name Parish. Like on North Dearborn or North. These two families came together. Uncle Jim, I'm trying to think of it. I know these names as well as I know mine. But anyway, the two families lived together in a basement flat in Holy Name Parish. My father was an altar boy at Holy Name Church, and all this sort of stuff. But then they lived there, and they went on to be the big or Jimmy became the alderman of this ward, which is a key ward back then, and Jeremiah became the city sealer.
What's a city sealer?
He's a guy that has to put a all he has to do is, I don't know what other desk, but all he had to sign all the documents. He's the one that signed it.
Those were pretty good positions to have then, I take it, from going from the...
One is certainly an elective position. There's a book on Jimmy Quinn somewhere in the Chicago Library. He was a ward committeeman and the alderman, and in it there are stories about things that happened during his regime. And he was one time Mrs. Potter Palmer came home. I guess they lived somewhere in that ward. She came home and she found Jimmy Quinn in the house, looking around her, looking behind the curtains, things like that. And he explained to me he was looking for his constituents. They just had a meeting there, and apparently he was seeing that they were all going to get out of the house without taking the house with them.
Oh, so his constituents...
Yeah.
You thought maybe they had taken the silver or something?
Oh, yeah, well, that was a general idea. He was there for a good reason, but I don't know. This is part of farmers come in, and there's this guy fishing around and looking around the house. And that was why he was there.
So he was a pretty powerful guy then. He could deliver the...
Oh, yeah, he was this book is about his leadership. Jimmy Quinn and Art was his son. He was called Prince Arthur. He became a state senator, and he was when I first went into the service. He was down with my mother and dad and things like that to see me off. I forget where we went off from, but it was either the airport or the railway station for New London, Connecticut.
So the family stayed good friends for all that time. The kids became friends with...
Oh yeah, they were all different.
But they weren't related by blood. They were just...
Yeah, although sometimes I think, no, that can't be. Grandma McCarthy was Mary Ellen McFadden before she was Grandma McCarthy.
Right.
And Jimmy, God, I know. Every once in a while, it's something like a name, I'll wake up 3 o'clock tomorrow morning and I know her better than I know her.
Right.
But they were, and your story I'm not going to talk about a few things.
Well, this woman whose house the alderman, the meeting was in, what's
Mrs. Potter Palmer was like the leading socialite and the richest woman, wife of one of the Potter Palmer's a great society family in like at the turn of the century, obviously.
And where did they live?
I don't know, it'd probably be somewhere in the 42nd Ward, somewhere. I don't know the extent of it. But there are a lot of, well, I guess there still are a lot of great mansions down somewhere around there. But I forget who always used to tell the story about Jimmy Quinn and Mr. Potiphar. Oh yeah, and the Tribune. There was another thing. Jimmy Quinn. Oh, he was called Hot Stove Jimmy Quinn. The Tribune came out after some election way back in the early century, where Jimmy had done something as the last maneuver of the campaign, some shrewd political movement, and they had a big cartoon of Jimmy carrying a stove on his back. Like, who was it? A hot stove, like Napoleon might have done from, I forget, it must have been a big defeat, but Jimmy came out of it well because he'd brought his hot stove along to the political contest. So they always called him Hot Stove Jimmy Quinn. It's hard to explain why this might not be funny this year, but funny.
But the hot stove was a metaphor for what, do you think? You mean that?
For being actually foresighted. When you're going to attack the Russians,
Make sure you bring something to keep you warm.
Jimmy not only brought his overcoat, he brought a hot stove. And there was some kind of joke that must have been made about it because it made the editorial page of the Tribune.
Amazing.
Wow.
Yeah, funny stories.
Is this watermelon going to get in it?
I hope so. I don't know what to even do. I sometimes shoot.
We moved out here. That street was all real Irish. You know, the first young man, I suppose he was in grammar school somewhere, to come across the street was Jack Freeman. And his mother and father were both Irish, and his father worked for the telephone company and things like that. And he was at Thomas Aquinas School, and he was like a year or 2 years older than me. And he came across the street and he introduced himself and said, "I'm Jack Freeman." And yeah, his name was Jack Freeman. And he said, Schlackett's drugstore on the corner has the best chocolate sodas in Chicago. That was its corner of Madison and Laurel Avenue, or Lotus Avenue down here, where there's nothing now. And he went to school. He was always 2 years ahead of me, and he was 2 years ahead of me at Ignatius. I have this they were real Irish, see, and I always had the feeling that, you know, gee, I wish that in the neighborhood you should be real Irish when you lived on Long Avenue in 1922, because during my life I've known people who were real Irish, were in Chicago, and some of their kids was, you know, when they were in high school, they knew all about the English, you know, the problem with the English, and even years later, some of these guys get angry if they even thought about the English. You know, they love thy neighbor as thyself didn't work at all with them. Anyway, what am I?
Yeah, well, that's.
At any rate, I was Irish, Dutch, German, and Scotch. My father was all Irish, and I guess Uncle Jimmy Quinn was all Irish, and then Mary Ellen McCarthy had some Scotch. So I always thought about that when I think, and Jack Freeman became a doctor, and he delivered 2 of my kids. And he became a doctor, but it was a gynecologist. And after the war, I had pains in my right hand region that sounded like appendicitis when I was a kid. I went into the service and I came back and I was courting my wife and I had some pains, here. And I called up Doc Freeman and I described the thing to him. He said, "Sounds like appendicitis to me." I said, "What?" I said, "Well, will you operate on me, Doc?" I said, "No, I can't do it. I'm limited. I'm gyncologist." And he steered me to a doctor who did it, and then he delivered the two of my kids who were born here. Amie was the only, she was born in California.
Yeah.
But that's another lot of, I wake up in the middle of the night thinking things that happen that seem funny or God's in his heaven and things work out, but yeah.
That's interesting. That's interesting.
What?
No, that's interesting. Just the whole idea of, being true Irish is an interesting.
Oh yeah, my God! I go to on St. Patrick's Day. You go to an Irish picnic. Well, this is years ago. I haven't been to a picnic, but yeah, there were guys who had their mind on beating somebody up who was there, and you couldn't dissuade one reason or another. And you wonder, you could really understand why the Irish, this IRA and all that are still here, and still, they're very reluctant to come closer than a couple of feet from a real Anglo-Saxon or something like that. The kids, maybe there's still some, but then you wonder how the world's going to settle down. You worry about the atom bomb. Everybody's talking about peace, but God's in his heaven. We hope he's going to be having. Down here during Kennedy's set to on the atom bomb, we were building those bomb shelters and all that kind of stuff. And our church down here was going into its reorganization, and the choir master was an Afro-American, black. She's a principal at some public school or something like that, and a Protestant. And this is at Thomas Aquinas Church, and her father was a Protestant minister who had been brought up by a bunch of Jewish families. He's also a jeweler. He learned the jewelry trade from this Jewish family. But anyway, I got to be kind of a buddy with him. I was, what do you call it, one of the readers in the Mass. And I got to know him pretty well, and he used to come to Mass, and we used to talk. But during the Kennedy's day, when that bomb situation with the Russians were, I'm forgetting whether it's Khrushchev or somebody else.
It's Khrushchev.
But anyway, I came down and I said, "Well, what do you think about this?" All the kids were practicing getting under tables and all this kind of stuff. But I said, "What do you think's going to happen?" He said, "Oh, God will intervene before anything will happen."
Well, that's
direct intervention. God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come, our shelter from the stormy blast, and our eternal home. Under the shadow of your throne, the saints above secure. Sufficient is your arm alone, and our defense is sure. Before the hills in order stood, where earth received her frame. From everlasting you are God, to endless years is the same. 1,000 ages in your sight are like an evening dawn. Short is the watch that ends the night before the rising sun. Time like an ever-flowing stream bears all our lives away. They flow, they move, they flow forgotten as a stream as a stream dies with the opening day. O God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come. Be thou our guard while life shall last, and our eternal home. Do you know what that is?
No.
I think it's the burial at sea, piece for the British Navy.
How did you memorize it? Where did you hear it?
I memorized a lot of songs in my time, but that's the one it gives me a lot to think about. And, Roosevelt met with Churchill on a ship in Halifax at one point, and I was thinking about, and I met two Irish people in Dublin with a British sailor at a bar with Amie at one point, and they were real good friends. But that song, because of its origin, I think is, shows, and it has no mention of the existence of Christ in it except by application of your words to it, but it's meaningful. Period.
Yeah.
I can sing. I've been working on the railroad too.
Were you a singer? Did you do a lot of singing?
I did a lot of singing at this nursing home I go to. I was Uncle M died.
Yeah.
Well, I used to wheel him, to the activities committee song fests and things like that, and he had a great activities director there. And I went, and his name was John. Well, he was from St. Luke's Parish, and he had a piano, and he used to play the piano at those things. And I got so that I kind of got in and led the singing, because my singing voice is one that anybody will try to drown out, including these alien people who went to those things. So I did that for all the years at John Court. He's a good friend of Mary Fran's, and I can't think of his wife's name. But anyway, I went on, and I'm still going there, but I don't sing there anymore because they've changed the whole system. But anyway, when that activities director who was there during your Uncle M's time left, she had to go to where her husband went. I stayed on for years, and gradually the friends I had the things they did at the activities, and the activities changed, so that now I still go there, but it's a changed sort of situation. But I learned a lot of songs. They used to print the songs and pass them out, and all I had to do is read it. If they had one on it, and I liked it, I would know. Those are all volunteers. These are volunteers too. They're all different kinds. I may have a ginkgo people, and this is a carob tree.
Oh, this is carob right here. Wow. Well, carob is good.
Yeah.
That's what they use to...
St. Joseph's fruit or whatever.
Yeah, they use carob. And what's the one in the back there? That's
That one's a mulberry.
Mulberry.
Right, there used to be one right across the alley there, but Mrs. Mungan chopped it down. She planted, she had a farm right in her backyard, and she's moved on. She sold her house about a year ago. This is my forest.